from this madness, right?
There's no escape. All right, get your questions in, folks. I know we've got quite a lot backed up. I'm slowly going through them. Got almost 1,500 watching across all platforms. And please support Kevin's work, all in the description box, his books, his other broadcasts, etc. Thanks for the super chat, Basil, and Jojo. Tashelle wants to know, because yeah, we did mention in the title, Royal, Vatican, and military mind control. So let's perhaps expand on that. Tashelle's asking about the Jesuits, Jesuit mind control.
Well, they were, I mean, the Jesuits historically, of course, were formed as a secret army to kill Queen Elizabeth I, actually. That was their first mission. But in 1580 something, time of the Armada. But they developed techniques early on that were later applied in these so-called residential schools and indigenous people all over the world, where they would target the children of rulers, and they would take them into special schools, these Jesuit schools, where they were brainwashed. And Ignatius Loyola, the mercenary soldier who founded the Jesuits, said, "Give me a child for 7 years and he will be ours for life." That infamous quote, right? So their mind control techniques started, centuries ago. And they were on the cutting edge of the new techniques, right? So Jesuit universities, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., all of these Jesuit-funded universities, if you look at the MKUltra research, it's always happening through these Jesuit colleges, right? Also, they became a strong financial power. So large banks like HSBC, Citibank, Bank of America, heavily Jesuit-controlled, and they're the ones funding a lot of the research and the military projects that had a keen interest in developing these electronic weapons. If you look in, I think in England they call it Jane's Encyclopedia of Military Weapons every year, and something like a majority of the weapons now coming out are all electronic. And you trace the origins to the companies, and they're often Vatican Bank affiliated corporations. So I mean, the Jesuit ties direct, and of course that involves all the so-called royals, because there's no, especially ever since the Holyrood Agreement in 2010, the Church of England and Rome are pretty much melded now, and share all of this stuff. So I mean, it's kind of, that's in general their piece of it, right?
So if you look at the experiments that they've done on soldiers over the years, does that tie into what you're saying?
Yeah, well, soldiers were a main guinea pig for all of this. They, because they're already regimented. You take look what they do with soldiers all over the world. You grab them when they're 17, 18 years old. That's when the human mind is most susceptible to conditioning. That's why all the kids on the iPad now, it's a bad sign, right? They get them at a young age. They target and market these things for young people, right? To condition their brain at a young age so they can't live without it. But soldiers are the same way. They're preconditioned to obey orders. I mean, we've seen all these movies about used in atomic testing, and all the experiments in that. And like I mentioned, and my friend Ann McAllister, her dad was, as a soldier, he had survived World War II, messed up. He had electric shock treatment. Right after that, his 2 kids are brought in and used. So it's all in the family. It's like a church community, culture of silence. Nobody learns. Military, the army, and churches are the best mediums for doing these experiments and control. So yeah, they're top of the list, right?
Yeah, the nuclear test they did on their own soldiers. Was it in New Mexico where they had them stood at various distances? So it says here, between 1952 and 1967, over 20,000 UK military personnel participated in nuclear weapons testing in Australia and the South Pacific. Conducted as part of the UK's nuclear program, involved the detonation of atomic and hydrogen bombs, as well as radioactive experiments.
Oh, yeah.
Veterans and their families reported health problems linked, and I bet the government denied that as well. But there was experiments in America as well, wasn't there?
All over. I mean, You know, there's that movie, The Atomic Cafe. It's a documentary, and it shows there's one scene in it where you see this mushroom cloud in the desert, and these soldiers all get in out of the trenches and walking towards it. And this briefing that's happening before, where the officer is telling these grunts, well, you know, there's heat, there's blast, and there's radiation. And of all three, radiation is the least damaging, you know. So go ahead, boys. And they're all marching towards the thing. Just horrible, criminal, okay? But not only that, not only the soldiers. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Air Force had a project, I forget the code name of it, but they laced the clouds over 50 North American cities with radioactive isotopes to study the long-term effects on the populations. So in Winnipeg, where I grew up in central Canada in Winnipeg, I had 11 uncles and aunts on my mom's side. 7 of those 8 men all died of cancer. And they were all living in Winnipeg at the time. And there was no history of cancer in our family. Okay. So yeah, oh, well, you learned that radiation kills people in the long run. Great discovery. It wasn't an experiment. They were doing it deliberately, right? Because once the population finds out about that, what's the effect? Oh my God, they can do anything they want to us. We're all guinea pigs. What can you do about it? They slaughtered us for generations. The effect of that is to enslave people even more. And so it's a long-term mind control, right?
Yeah, and changing the physiology of people and creating premature deaths. Professor Hamamoto calls them downwinders. We've got a super chat question here from Basil, and that is the truth in danger if we can't perceive it?
Well, the truth is never in danger. It has a life of its own. It exists whether we see it or not. And I believe it has a force in history that brings down tyranny anyway. It helps when people embody that truth. But I do believe there's a hidden hand in all this stuff. And the more we learn these things, the question is not let's learn more horrible stuff. We know the nature of the system to do this. It's criminal and murderous. And if we don't change it, then we're as guilty as the people doing it, right? And that's truth embodied, not just as a nice idea. We got to embody that truth, and otherwise the future is too horrible to imagine, right?
Question from Anna. Do you think Jesuits are tied to MI6 and DARPA?
Probably, or Jesuit influenced. I mean, it's like with the Mormons, right? Why does the CIA and FBI recruit so many Mormons? Well, they have almost as much money as the Vatican Bank. What was it, 269 billion the other day they found? Like, but the Mormonism was started as a social engineering project to see how to control people. I mean, they admit to that. So, I mean, yeah, they recruit out of reliable populations. Like, and who's more brainwashed than someone raised in the Jesuits, right? I mean, that's part of the case which we haven't talked about. We've talked about before, the case being brought in September against the present Pope Leo and his involvement in these cultic ceremonies. I mean, it's designed to weed out who's willing to take part in these things and who isn't, and then they're the future Pope, right? I mean, it's the way the system is set up to just weed out any honest human elements, right?
Yeah. So the next question is from Nathan. What about Western public school circular brainwashing enter the transhuman psyop?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's lots of people who know better have been talking about that, about that whole agenda, transgenderism and all that. I mean, I just came across this new evidence on the west coast of Canada showing how all the United Church camps are actively recruiting children, and one of the first things they teach them in these camps is you have depression problems because you think you're a woman, you're a young girl, but in fact you should be a boy. And it's been propagated by the Ministry of Children and Families in British Columbia, the government system, by the RCMP, by church people, of course, and the police. They're all saying the same thing, and they're rounding up children who have depression problems and sending them in these special United Church camps. That's the church that tossed me out, but the United Church was set up as an act of parliament in 1924. It's an arm of this. It's a state church. So all these programs, they're all funneling to all, like the octopus, into all of its tentacles, right?
All right. Next question is from Pearl's World. Were any Australian children used via the Catholic Church in mind control? Oh, I'm sure they had a field day down there with the indigenous people.
Well, that came out during the George Pell trial. Remember that Catholic cardinal who got booted out as part of the faction fight between Bergoglio and Ratzinger? But one of our people who then vanished, unfortunately, Georgina Cameron, she had documented this about how Native children were being brought in en masse for the same experiments. You know, there's a lot of affinity between Australia and Canada in the way Indigenous people were, you know, wiped out in these places, right?
I'm sure there was a lot of parallels, yeah. Susie wants to know, what's the real name of the Hollywood Hospital in Vancouver, please, Kevin?
That was its real name. That was the only name it was known by. And a lot of the stuff that was online about it, of course, is swabbed out now. But we make some reference to it in Murder by Decree, murderbydecree.com. And it was called Hollywood because a lot of the dignitaries like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and people who were on the CIA payroll, they were, Walt Disney was another, they came up all the time, you know, to hold benefits, you know, to raise money for the Hollywood Hospital and that. So yeah, it had that connection too.
God, we could do a whole show on this next question. Do you think they have changed the music frequency to change people's behavior?
Well, that's interesting you asked that because Anne Diamond, my friend in Montreal, who's a survivor of MK she was in a group of children, and it included Leonard Cohen, the Canadian writer, songwriter. And he was also being programmed. And when you look into that, what was that book written about Laurel Canyon, where, you know, all these top singers, they all died of, quote, suicide. Their dads were all in the military or in CIA. And getting the musicians on board with this project. Like you pointed the Grateful Dead and people like that earlier. Yeah, the music frequency is a whole part of this programming. So there was a big focus on singers and songwriters, especially in the 60s and 70s, to be part of that program, even if they weren't aware, I think, that they were doing it, but at least programmed to do that, like Anne described when she saw Leonard in there.
Yeah, we've had ex-Satanist Zachary King on twice, including part 2 yesterday. And he was talking about the emergence of Kid Rock and what Kid Rock had to do to get famous and the message that's portrayed through the lyrics. And from my own research into the prison industrial complex and the school to prison pipeline, you've got huge financial companies like BlackRock have got investments in the private prisons that get like $60,000 a year of taxpayers' money per person who goes into the prison. And then you've got them investing in the same rap entities that are glamorizing the drug dealing lifestyle, the crime committing lifestyle. You got phonies like Rick Ross, who was a prison guard, who stole his name from the real Rick Ross, who I've interviewed, who was a importer of the white powder, and just putting videos out there. So they're indoctrinating these young people. It is a form of mind control to go out and commit crimes and just go straight over to the prisons where they're making tens of billions a year, the contracts. And it's predominantly young people, drug offenders, filling these prisons, the lowest hanging fruit. It's obscene.
Shaun, we got to talk more about the whole private prison thing because, not coincidentally, this has just opened up in the work I'm doing with people in the States. Yesterday, I spoke to 2 guys, and their friend has just been given 100 years in prison. 25 now in Texas and all over the states, you get automatic 25-year sentence if you miss a court appointment. Hello? You know, he wasn't even notified of these appointments, and boom, he's in jail for 100 years. And of course, Texas has more private prisons. This GEO, one of the big private prison corporations, and it's a big growth industry, as you know, right? So Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is a former lobbyist for the private prison. So they lower, you know, they do away with all legal standards and due process. They leave it up to the judge to sentence you for the rest of your life for nothing, no due process, nothing. And they've got this huge slave industry. It's a slave market all over again, right? So we should, yeah, I'd love to learn more about you, what you know about private prisons and that. Compare notes.
I've written a series of books deconstructing the war on drugs and mass incarceration. They left a loophole in the Constitution saying that slavery was abolished except for people convicted of crimes. So they just started criminalizing people and getting them in the exact same areas they were working in when they were slaves. But in the context of what you just said, 100 years, $60,000 a year. If anyone could even live to that that long, that's $6 million transferred over to the prison industrial complex, just like that, client for life.
Now
it's obscene.
Now this GO and the other big corporations, they're lobbying the government for tax exemptions, and so they can just operate like the Vatican, right? It's a law unto themselves, and these guys who are being targeted by it were all part of doing common law education workshops, and every one of them now is getting picked up on nothing, right? This one guy there was a gas explosion on his land. Next thing he knows, all these paramilitary people are attacking him, shooting bullets through the window, and they accuse him, of shooting back when he didn't even own a gun. It's complete, just setting people up to fuel this system you're talking about, right?
It needs a never-ending source of fresh meat to go into it.
Right.
Professor Hamamoto's left a comment. Suzanne Leonard Cohen, about a programmed woman. Judy Collins covered the song. She was in a Manhattan sex cult called the Sullivanians. Have you heard of them, Kevin?
I think I did. Unless I'm wrong, it was named after William Sullivan, who was one of the founders of the CIA. So it had MK Ultra kind of connection. Yes.
All right. So the next question, and thanks for that question, Reese, about musical frequencies. The royals did. Didn't Queen Elizabeth have a sister that was institutionalized early on in her life? Now, it was even portrayed in The Crown. Bog, Katie, these family members that were institutionalized by the royals. Anything to add there, Kevin?
No, I just knew about Margaret. Didn't know about other ones, but
okay. Does Kevin have any details about Leonard, Kille?
No, I'm sorry, I haven't heard that name before.
No, I'm not either. What really happened to brother Michael Trudeau? Avalanche. Nobody ever found. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no. To tell you the truth, I'd have to look it up. I can't remember. I just know that it was interesting because when we're working in Holland with Tos Nieuwenhuis and others who survived the 9 circle rituals, who'd been born into the cult, some of the Dutch royals who were named as participating, one of the guys, I forget, he was a brother of the present now King Willem Alexander. He died in a skiing accident, and you see this again and again. It's like almost a code word for when you're eliminating one of your own family for these cultic activities, right?
Wasn't Ramdas another one who was instrumental in the LSD era?
Richard Alpert or something, his name was. He was, again, like a chemical professor at Harvard or one of these places who kind of, went the guru trip, but I mean, it's right, more of the same.
Do you know anything about the MK Ultra Super Soldiers program?
Not enough. I've read references to it. The thing is to try to find eyewitnesses on this stuff, which is really hard because people are programmed, right? They have a self-destruct programming. I found that with the residential school survivors. Sometimes people would talk and then they go kill themselves because it's wired in to not share stuff, right?
So if people want to learn more about the super soldiers, I recommend you watch one of my favorite documentaries ever called Madness on the Fast Lane. I mean, they're not identified as super soldiers in this documentary. It's a BBC documentary. But there's many theories that that's what they are because no one has explained their behavior to this date. It's about 2 sisters, Ursula and Sabina Eriksson, Swedish sisters. And it just starts out with them on the motorway, the M6, or the freeway, as you call it in America. This is May 2008. And they're running into traffic at speed. and the cops get called out, and they're literally they're getting run over and crushed, and then the cops come, and then one just jumps up and starts fighting the cop. And this is just the beginning of it, and it just gets more and more insane all the way throughout it until people are unalived, and there's no explanation for the superhuman strength of these sisters. And they bring all kinds of psychoanalysts in at the end, because the twin sister, polyado, all these different theories, a puff of madness as to how they behave like this. But there's a leading theory online in the conspiracy research community that they were indeed super soldiers. But you can watch this, the actual footage of them running into the traffic and just bouncing off and throwing cops around. These women are just throwing the police around. It's absolutely insane. All right, so Tracy wants to know, Kevin, how can we warn the population about the dangers of having a digital ID? This surely must be MK Ultra in a different form.
Well, there's a tendency to look at one scale of the dragon and not the whole beast, and we can point out these different manifestations of it. But when you do that, we're doing people a disservice, because we're not talking about what's causing it, this big source of it. So I think more important than talking about an aspect of it is to say, here's where it's coming from, here's the agenda, we need to break out now, and help people start doing that, even in a small way. Because of course it's all part of this, but it's not MK Ultra anymore. It's the nature of the system. It's metastasized, so it's aimed at all of us now. Right?
Next question is from the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen. So it can be said MK Ultra never stopped. It just continues under various names. What is a list of those names as a trail, seeing as the MK Ultra is 50 years ago? I think he's asking for more contemporary categories.
Well, it doesn't really have names. It's the only names allowed out. It was like that picture of those kids, who were frozen dead. The only names allowed out are official spin names. So why even use them? They're designed to distract. It's like Aristotle said, when you know the nature of something, you'll know you can predict accurately its actions. You know what you're dealing with. So I keep saying, know the nature of the system. That's what you need to know, not the different nomenclatures and descriptions, right?
Yeah, by definition, any contemporary secretive programs are going to be kept secret. Thanks for the super chat. CIA's BCI Annie Sumo on Substack has great information on Hollywood, as does Jay Dyer. We'll have to get him back on. He does some good talks on this. All right, so Phoenix Rising, does Kevin know about the live broadcasting of the Pikton murders?
I hadn't heard there were live broadcasts. I heard that they had been filmed, because these are the serial killings on the west coast of Canada, which is a long tradition.
Oops. Well, while Kevin's sorting that out, don't forget to check out Kevin's links in the description box.
Yeah. So the Native people have been disappearing for generations, but the point is, and they still are, this Pikton brothers, they were the fall guys, the Lee Harvey Oswalds. They were the body disposal crew. The killings were happening at a different home involving prime ministers, top people who were actually engaged in the killing, and the snuff filming that was going on as well. It was a snuff film studio. And we even know where these studios are in Vancouver. We've been documenting them with the help of police and everything. And they move around a lot, but they're always under kind of official covers. And so, yeah, I mean, it's part of the system.
Going back to our earlier episodes now, ask Kevin what he thinks about the graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada.
There were mass graves all over the country, including Kamloops. We documented 22 of them. I mean, what do you do with 60,000 plus bodies? You incinerated a lot of them. One of the principals at the Anglican school in Brantford said, we're forced to bury children 2 and 3 to her grave. We got the documents, everything, but starting around 1968, the RCMP and the churches began destroying all the graves. And we've also got letters about that documented. In 2022, I believe it was, they staged a so-called dig. The reason they had to dig is one of the band council members, the Kamloops Band Council in Kamloops, leaked to the press that they had found more bones. So the band council and the RCMP, in other words, the serial killers themselves, step in and say they're doing a dig, although they never let anybody look at it. They never release the results, and they say, yeah, we found 215 children. But okay, but who did it? What did they die of? It was just a fog put around it. But then you saw that number 215 everywhere. And now people wear orange shirts saying, remember the 215. Well, what about the 60,000? You see, it was a psyop designed to discredit and de-emphasize what we had brought out and create a new narrative. And the narrative, and now it's getting so bad in Canada, people are saying, well, there were no mass graves. Let's see where they are. Well, they're all destroyed, guys, by now, pretty much. But we showed the process and where they were buried and all that. In 2010, when we released the first list of mass graves, not one media, not one cop, not one